So in this video, basically, I'm gonna turn this into the super status and see if I can save it from the Facebook Marketplace. I don't know if I can save it, but what I'm gonna do is go back in time and tell you my little story with it. See if you can get some value out of there. If you get bored in that section, just move on to the chapters. Here's where my peasant status journey begins. My friend sends me a link over for this $400 frame set, and I'm like, I'm all in to replace my Enduro because the Enduro was a little bit tired. So inside the status new box, this is what you get. We have little hoses to isolate the brake lines to hopefully make this bike a little bit quieter, but it is not a super quiet bike. The headset inside the bike is the same as the Levo, the Canevo, the Enduro, and a lot of other specialized bikes out there, but it is a specialty headset. If you know what this high-rise headset thing is, let me know because I never figured it out. Building this bike from scratch was an absolute nightmare because it's not tube in tube. You have to physically run your own dropper post internal cable routing tool inside of the frame, and it's a little tricky to get around the bends, so it is definitely a basic budget build. This may be redundant, but it may help someone out there. This is the bottom bracket you need for the status. It's a SRAM Dub 73mm, and basically it's a basic bottom bracket for a boost wheel set. Now it took me quite a bit of research to figure that out, so I figured I'd throw it in. Being more of an e-biker than an Amish guy, you need a special SRAM BB bottom bracket tool to install this guy. And if you didn't know, I guess this is a normal bottom bracket. It doesn't spin very much. Maybe I watch too many road bike videos because their cranks spin quite a bit more. I love me some Loctite. Well, actually, I love me some bolts not falling out. So I put red Loctite on everything. Now this was pre-orange Loctite days, so I was using red. My only regret during building this bike was not putting Loctite on every single bolt because it gets pretty darn ugly later on in the video. You're probably a brokey if you're riding a status, so it has a pretty big head tube, and if you're searching for a used fork, you need to have at least a 7mm steerer in an extra large or size S5 frame. These little details are an absolute nightmare when you're building the bike up. So the bike comes with this little shim for the dropper post that shims it down to 31.6, but if you pull the shim out, it's a standard 34.9 like most modern bikes. But basically, whichever dropper post you can find cheaper, buy a shim for that one. The only thing I dislike more than loose bolts is mullet bikes. So the initial plan was to go full 29 on this status because I dislike 29. If you like mullet, I'm happy for you, but you need to try both and see which one you like more. So I have some bad news about running 29-inch wheels on this bike. The 2.5-inch Assegai does not fit. It basically gouges into the chainstay on the drive side into the weld. And that's kind of a structural part, so it's not a good idea to be gouging your tire into the weld. So mullet it is, for now. Getting the status all dialed up with actual matching suspension for once, things went from bad to worse. So I got this Marzocchi Z1 2025 e-bike chassis fork, because, I don't know, Marzocchi sounded cool. Yeah, but their marketing's absolute bullshit. And this is basically a Fox 34 or a Marzocchi Z2 with a downgraded damper so it doesn't compete with the Fox 36 anymore. Bolting in the matching Marzocchi 2025, so basically the stickers match so I could take some nice pictures. This was a bad idea, but you will learn a little bit later about this bike and running coils, and it's not so bad. After figuring out Marzocchi's marketing plan to not compete with Fox anymore, bolting in an ancient Fox 36 rhythm and making the bike rideable again, I went out and rode that Bomber coil shock with the Springdex coil, and the Springdex is progressive towards the 20% end of the stroke, but it is not a progressive enough spring for the status. So what you need on the status to ride a coil is some serious bottom out control. A good option for this bike would be like a Super Deluxe with hydraulic bottom out, a Cane Creek Tygon, or a progressive spring. So I'm coming at you with hindsight, so I basically surrendered, went back to air shocks, went Devia Topaz versus Floatex. So just so you know, perception's more important than reality in your brain. But in reality, the Topaz is a better shock than the Floatex. But this was an awful day. The bike was basically hurt my back because it's so harsh in the rear end, and the bike sounded like a shopping cart. So anytime something goes bad, it usually goes worse, and it sure did. In less than 2 runs down the bike park, the entire status had rattled apart like a shopping cart. After that day, I basically stripped the bike down and was ready to put it on Facebook Marketplace, but I'm going to give it one last stab and try to turn it into the super status. Whoa, forgot. So if you're happy with your status, I am very happy for you. Don't let me change your mind. My microphone wasn't on, so just pretend it's one of those like cheap China videos that basically has a dub over and the lips don't line up. So here's the plan on the super status. Full 29-inch wheels, 180mm fork, 230x65 shock. So it's going to be a 180 29er with a super short chainstay. It's going to be absolutely amazing or absolutely trash. So these are proven parts that I know work great. Fox 38 is a very plush fork. I was running it with the Marzocchi Super Z, and if you like arm pump and chatter, you need to pick one up. If you like plush bucket coil shocks, definitely go for the 38. You know, you're probably a brokey, so I'm going to be running the Suntour Vora. I have a tag on in the box, but that's double the cost of the frame. Very important thing about this status. So we have a high-low flip chip. This is the low setting. I'm going to be running it in the low setting because I'm putting a 20 centimeter larger wheel on the rear, so I didn't put it in the low setting. If you're riding the stock mullet, you need to reverse this because this bike is a pedal strike nightmare with its modern, progressive, long, low, slack geometry. This flip chip does almost nothing. So this is the high setting. If you have the stock mullet, make it look like this. Honestly, it doesn't really affect the bike. You would be hard pressed to notice the difference. I don't want to give Suntour too much free marketing. It's a legendary shock and it costs $400. It's got big mountain character. Like, it is properly in place on a downhill bike. So if you're trying to build a park status, this is the best shock. So the Suntour Vora is a DVO Jade, and then Suntour borrows it. And they're like, we're going to put some mongoose in this. And when I say mongoose, I mean that in a good way, because Suntour puts a 14mm steel stanchion into the DVO Jade. And maybe they change a few shim stacks. But regardless, I'm going to need to put a heavy duty progressive spring on this bike, and MRP is the only brand that makes a 600-pound progressive spring for my fat ass. So pay attention closely if you're using a progressive spring here. You need to put the tighter wound coils on the bottom or it's going to creak like a mother. The status comes with a 230x60 shock. A 230x65 stroke shock fits in the bike and does not plow into the frame and destroy anything, but if you're one of those analists, you can use a little travel reducer, and if you're on the Suntour Vora, you can use the DVO Jade clips, because Suntour hasn't figured out how to make a travel reducer yet. Got the suspension in the bike. Let's see what 29-inch tire is going to fit in this rear status. So I have a DHR2 and a 2.4 wide tire. So Maxxis is going to be your best bet for stuffing a 29-inch wheel in this bike, because when you look down at a 2.5-inch wide Maxxis tire, like, oh, it's a little narrow. The 2.5-inch DHR2 does fit in there, but it just barely skims on the rear chainstay, and it's a little bit sketchy even for my sketchy self. So quick side note here, the SRAM NX cassettes are absolute piece of garbage. So I have a Sun X, is that what it is? Anyway, it's the cheapest 12-speed cassette and it's actually better. It's a little bit heavier, but it's going to last you quite a bit longer, and it's not going to have all these fitment issues and having to put shims underneath the cassette. The next tire on test is the Maxxis Aggressor in 2.5-inch wide. So this is definitely not quite as an aggressive in the tire. It's like faster rolling or some kind of nonsense. Not my first choice, but beggars can't be choosers with their $400 peasant status frame. We are clear for takeoff with a 2.5-inch wide Maxxis Aggressor. It is a little bit sketchily close, but nothing is rubbing. Here's the super status in all its glory. 180mm of travel, front and rear, full 29-inch wheel set with the most cheapest suspension parts money can buy. Well, the best suspension parts money can buy on a budget. The heart of this bike is the Suntour Vora with the MRP spring, but I have some bad news. The MRP spring was kind of dancing around on the Suntour Vora, so I had to use a Spring Deck spring isolators. and MRP wouldn't answer my email, so they don't get any shout outs for this one. So I have the steer tube of doom up here, and hopefully it doesn't turn into the steer tube of doom. But here's the bike. It definitely sounds pretty darn noisy. So you need to pay attention closely because the next chapter on this video is the most important. Under your normal riding conditions, massive bolt checks and Loctite aren't completely necessary, but I can tell you from bike park, every bolt will come loose, like this bike. I learned this from the forums pages. The little lever that holds the rear axle on doesn't have any Loctite from the factory, and this is what will make your bike sound like a shopping cart. So healthy doses of orange Loctite on every single bolt in the rear of the bike if you don't want the shopping cart vibe. When I say every single bolt needs Loctite, that includes the rear axle. So there was some suspension grease on the rear axle, so I reapplied it. Hopefully this will help it not coming loose. Healthy dose of Loctite on the rear axle because you don't want the rear wheel to come loose. Another healthy dose of Loctite on the derailleur hanger on the opposite side of the axle. So the axle goes through the wheel into the derailleur hanger, and that's what makes the structure of the rear wheel. And this bike has $3 to $4 of orange Loctite, so hopefully it doesn't come loose the next day at the bike park. After everything is Loctite and torqued, I like to take a little paint pen and draw a line through the bolt onto the frame. This way I can just basically look down at any time I question a bolt coming loose and know if it's tight without putting a torque wrench or an Allen key on there. So another bolt on this bike that didn't have Loctite that could cause you a lot of headaches is this one silver bolt on the drive side. So what this silver bolt does basically holds the derailleur hanger in place, and if it comes loose the bike won't shift very good and you could misdiagnose it as something else, as I almost did. After I tightened that bolt up, applied a bunch of Loctite, it shifted through all the gears nice and clean. Apply a little lube to your chain so all that moon dust will stick to it later on. Learning from the last video, a short chainstay is more friendly and more fun and not require me to clip in. I'm going to go back to flat pedals because I think they're more fun. All these modifications lead up to a 64-degree head angle. Now I'm not going to measure the stock one because I already modified this bike, but the main thing you should know is it brings the bottom bracket up to 365, and this will eliminate pedal strikes, and that's basically my favorite number from all the hacked up bikes I've owned and rode.
Pretty promising on the super status, so the bike is just kind of like rolling through everything.
The bike feels incredibly natural straight out of the gate. It's definitely carrying speed better, no surprise here with a full 29-inch wheel setup. So the first thing I noticed during this little transfer stage of my 5,000 foot alpine descent is the bike climbs better and it doesn't pedal strike. So the cross-country aspect of this bike is legendary. So there's not super challenging terrain on this descent, it's more of an adventure ride, but there's a little bit of chunk and we'll see how that goes.
Man, this bike is so much faster.
I'm not against you riding mullet bikes. If you love your mullet, just love it. But I can tell you the characteristic of the bike is completely changed with a 29-inch rear in the back of the bike. It's carry speed, it's an absolute monster truck, and it's basically more fun. Like tiny little jumps on this trail, but I can tell you this is the first time I've been on the correct progressive spring for my weight, and the suspension feels absolutely brilliant. So what you need on the status to ride a coil is the right amount of progression, and the progression has to come from the shock itself because the bike doesn't have it. So that'd be hydraulic bottom mount or the progressive spring. So far that MRP spring has been utterly impressive except for the installation of it. So it will void your warranty, or it could cause damage to your bike, so I don't fully recommend you butchering your bike up. Take your own risk. But then you can expect to pedal less and have more fun, more glide speed. And basically this bike has a ridiculously short chainstay, so it retains its playfulness. Moving on to the fork. So there's 3 different types of enduro forks. There's a 160, there's a 170, and there's a 180. So a 180mm fork has a completely different characteristic of a 160. When you ride a 160, they're incredibly hard to tune. Basically, you get a wall of resistance, or they're making a loud clapping noise when it comes to Fox forks. So with the 180mm fork, you have unlimited mid-stroke support. It's super plush, and you don't have to be very precise with your setup. That goes for the Sun Turbora as well. It's a very simple, downhill-oriented shock. It doesn't require a lot of tinkering as long as you get the correct spring. The Super Status setup is incredible. Because of the short chainstay, this bike is basically pretty fun on green flow trails. Like, it makes fun out of all the little side hits and pops. But it still maintains its pretty capable characteristic when it comes to the chunder, with that big heavy duty rear coil shock and that slowed down rear suspension because of the 29-inch rear wheel. The best modification you can make is the one that makes you have more fun. So click this Levo video because it will change your mind.